Earth Day is fast approaching, and with it comes an increased awareness of our environment. But with railroads being such a massive mover of people and freight, they have gotten quite a large amount of scrutiny from the media on their carbon footprint. But as a rail fan, seeing this, is all of it fair? Let's take a look. So for this Earth Day, we are going to look at several articles that talk about the impact of railroads on the environment. And as a rail fan, I'll just give my little input on what I think of these. Now, being a rail fan, I won't agree with everything that these articles say, and I will poke fun at them in some areas, but I politely ask that you guys do not go harassing these articles, don't cancel the organizations behind them. I do want trains to be given a better reputation. That's one of the main reasons I'm doing this. But I want to get there in a civil, respectful manner. So, with that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for listening. Let's get started. Our first article comes from the New York Times and asks the question, trains are cleaner than planes, right? What happened was, the writer of this article took the trains, the Amtrak's California Zephyr and Lakeshore Limited, from New York City to Emeryville, just outside of San Francisco, took the carbon output of these trains and compared it to a flight from New York to San Francisco. It was found that a flight from New York to San Francisco emits about 840 pounds of carbon dioxide, but a train trip emits even more than that. Now, I will give this article credit. It does mention that Amtrak is ordering the new Siemens chargers, which are more eco-friendly than the existing Genesis series, but there is something missing here, and that is the frequency of trains versus planes per day. There are several cities in America that might only have 1 to 2 trains per day, if that, but the same city can have dozens of daily flights. And so even if 1 or 2 trains is not as eco-friendly as one flight, when you put in how many flights there are per day versus how many trains, that's starting to turn the tables a little bit on who's really the more eco-friendly one. And yes, Amtrak is making plans to expand their services to other parts of the country, but there is also another little loophole here. That is that Amtrak trains are more eco-friendly when they have a distance of about 400 miles, and many of the planned trains do fall within this range, or at least relatively close. And there's a whole nother side to this than just the passenger transport, and that is freight rail. And even though the article just briefly mentions freight rail, when it comes to capacity, freight trains are light years ahead of any other land transport and are only beaten out by ships. So that's another part of trains that are definitely more eco-friendly than the competition. But keep that in mind, because that's going to be something to remember with these next few articles. And our next article is about the filthy emissions of railroad locomotives and the rail unions sounding the alarm, written by the American Prospect. Basically, this is about how much diesel locomotives pollute and how many of the locomotives that the railroads have are decades old and do not meet modern emission standards. And this isn't entirely false. It is true that there are a lot of locomotives on Class 1 railroads that are several decades old that do still run in rail yards. That's not wrong. However, it's not like the railroads aren't doing anything to improve their carbon, it's not like the railroads are doing nothing to improve their environmental impact. I mean, for the past several years, railroads have been looking at other fuel sources for diesel locomotives, including battery and hydrogen. And in fact, they've been converting a lot of their locomotives, both 4-axle and 6-axle, to be more eco-friendly and to meet certain tier credits. Now, this isn't perfect, but it is a step better. And even though this article does mention Tier 4 locomotives, though it does say that these are in the vast minority, which is true. However, at this point, railroads have ordered over 1,000 Tier 4 locomotives, which is quite a fair amount, and they have way more Tier 3 locomotives, so yeah, progress might be a little bit slow, but railroads are still trying. It's not the fastest progress in the world, but for one thing, this isn't just something that you can fix overnight, and for another thing, like I've been saying, they're at least making an effort to make progress. And That's like they know they're aware to some extent. Like they're not perfect, but they're trying to some extent. But apparently it's not enough, because apparently diesel locomotive exhaust is quite dangerous because it can be a health hazard for those living near rail yards and seeing these locomotives every day, which I suppose if you have a lot of breathing difficulty and if you're exposed to it day in and day out constantly for years straight, okay, then maybe I could see how there would be some harm with that. But giving in my personal railfanning experience here, I've been railfanning for many years. I have seen hundreds, possibly thousands of diesel locomotives, and my railfan friends have likely seen even more than me, so just think about all the diesel exhaust we must have inhaled, and yet we're still physically fine. So, I wouldn't say that it's that big of a threat to the general public. That's just me. But if you thought that diesel locomotive fumes were bad, just wait until you hear about the cargo that they're moving. In this case, that cargo is coal, which leads us to our final article written by Fossil Fuel Connections. And basically what it says is, it just kind of briefs how the railroads transport coal, but apparently there is a bunch of coal dust that comes off of the railroads. And again, there is some bit of truth to that. Yes, there is coal dust that blows off of the coal trains, but apparently it's hundreds of pounds of it. So that's news to me. And apparently it's enough to outright derail a train.
Huh?
This is complete news to me. So either I must be missing something here, because I have never heard of a train derailing from built-up coal dust. Now, possibly if it was in, like, a coal mine somewhere, but that's the only way I could see that. So, if someone has heard about something like this happening, please let me know, because this is news to me. But if coal dust is apparently able to derail a train, it is also able to be easily inhaled, and it's able to be easily inhaled by practically anyone, and the metals in the coal can lead to respiratory problems, which can include cancer. So again, along with the diesel locomotive argument, it's the same as the diesel locomotive argument. I have seen hundreds of coal trains over the years. My friends have probably seen more coal trains than me, so think of all the diesel exhaust and the coal fumes that we must have inhaled after all this time, and yet we're still physically fine. So either I'm missing something here, I secretly have a disease and need to go to the hospital, or coal trains are not the bioweapon that they're being portrayed as. One of those. Now, maybe I am missing something, maybe there is some piece to this that I'm not getting, but it's not really adding up, so I don't understand. Yeah, it's odd. And then that goes back into saying the diesel locomotive emissions, which we've already covered. And I should probably say I have found one other article written by the Los Angeles Times that's also about the apparent terrors of diesel locomotive emissions. And it's pretty much a lot of the same points that were already mentioned. And I should mention how, like, obviously it's not great that diesel locomotive emissions exist. Like, it's not entirely false. Like, there are still quite a few diesels that do it, but at the same time, it's like I already said, railroads are still at least making some effort to some extent to improve on their environmental impact when they're already one of the most eco-friendly ways to transport goods. So yeah, that pretty much concludes this little analysis. I hope it was at least a little bit informative. And again, I want to reemphasize, please do not cancel or go after anyone who made these articles. As much as I disagree with them, I don't want to cancel anyone off the face of the internet here. I'm just a rail fan who wants to see trains treated at least a little bit more in a positive light. Of course, they're far from perfect, but they're also not absolutely destroying our society or anything. But, yeah, that's pretty much how it is. Thanks for watching this little Earth Day special of mine.